Real painting is a mysterious and continuous struggle with chance. Mysterious because the very substance of the paint can make such a direct assault upon the nervous system. Continuous because the medium is so fluid and subtle that every change that is made loses what is already there in the hope of making a fresh gain. I think that painting today is pure intuition and luck, and taking advantage of what happens when you splash the bits down. You may say we're always trying to defeat death by leaving images. It won't make any difference. You'll just be dead. An image may live on. There it is.
Francis Bacon is one of the essential artists of the 20th century. From 3 studies for figures at the base of a crucifixion, which he painted in 1944, through to works made just before his death in 1992, Bacon undertook a pitiless analysis in paint of himself and his friends, of the human body, and of our place in a godless universe. Bacon was born in Ireland in 1909. After a visit to Berlin in the late 1920s, he worked in London as an interior designer. He lived mostly in London for the rest of his life, combining a bohemian lifestyle with the rigorous pursuit of his art. From 1961 he lived and worked in 7 Rees Mews, South Kensington. His studio and its contents have been meticulously reconstructed at the Hugh Lane Gallery in Dublin. This film offers a focused look at many of Bacon's major canvases. The words, newly recorded by Derek Jacobi, are taken from the artist's rare written statements about art and from a number of interviews, including the exceptional series conducted by the critic David Sylvester.
Painting is a world of its own. It's self-sufficient. Most of the time, when one talks about painting, one says nothing interesting. It's all rather superficial. What can one say? Basically, I believe that you simply cannot talk about painting. It just isn't possible. I'm talkative, it's the Irish in me, but frankly, I don't think it's possible. And even if it were, it's not what's important. The important thing for a painter is to paint, and nothing else. The most important thing is to look at the painting, to read the poetry, or listen to the music, not in order to understand it or to know it, but to feel something. I think of myself as a kind of pulverizing machine into which everything I look at is fed. Art is a method of opening up areas of feeling rather than merely an illustration of an object. A picture should be a recreation of an event rather than an illustration of an object. But there is no tension in the pictures unless there is a struggle with the object. I would like my pictures to look as if a human being had passed between them, like a snail, leaving a trail of the human presence and memory trace of past events as the snail leaves its slime. I never go through a day without thinking sometime about death. It just comes into everything that you do, into everything that you see. I realised I was going to die when I was 17. I remember it very, very clearly. I remember looking at a dog shit on the pavement, and I suddenly realised, there it is. This is what life is like. Strangely enough, it tormented me for months, till I came to, as it were, accept that here you are, existing for a second, brushed off like flies on the wall. I had no money. I lost it in the casino. But I had some canvases there, which I had already used, so I turned them and discovered that the unprimed side was much easier to work on. And since then I've always worked on the unprimed side of the canvas. If you make a mark on the unprimed side of the canvas, it's there. It's indelibly made. I've always wanted to paint curtains. I love rooms that are hung all around with curtains. I had a feeling that I could make these images much more poignant in the darkness and without colour. You can lose the forms more easily in darkness, can't you? Most of those pictures were done of somebody who was always in a state of unease. And whether that has been conveyed through the pictures, I don't know. But I suppose, in attempting to trap this image, that as this man was very neurotic and almost hysterical, this may possibly have come across in the paintings. I see every image all the time in a shifting way and almost in shifting sequences, so that one can take it from more or less what is called ordinary figuration to a very, very far point. Of course, what in a curious way one's always hoping to do is to paint the one picture that will annihilate all the others, to concentrate everything into one painting. Well, unfortunately, I've never yet been able to make the one image that sums up all the others. So, one image against the others seems to be able to say the thing more. I find it so difficult to do one figure that generally seems enough. And of course, I've got an obsession with doing the one perfect image. In the complicated stage in which painting is now, the moment there are several figures, at any rate several figures on the same canvas, the story, and the moment the story begins to be elaborated, the boredom sets in. The story talks louder than the paint. By glass, you cut the paintings away from their surroundings, and by glazing them, I feel it gives an added depth and texture to the quality of the type of paint that I use. I couldn't do the particular kind of thing I'm trying to do, which is to make a chaos in an isolated area with varnished pictures or other type of paint. I need this absolutely thin, stained background against which I can do this image, which I'm trying to do and which I've never really achieved. I don't want the reflections to be there. I feel that they should be put up with. I feel that because of the very flat way I paint. The glass helps to unify the picture. I also like the distance between what has been done and the onlooker that the glass creates. I like, as it were, the removal of the object as far as possible. Oddly enough, I even like Rembrandts under glass. And it's true to say, in many ways, they're more difficult to see, but you can still look into them. It's the distance, that this thing is shut away from the spectator. I look at animal photographs all the time, because animal movement and human movement are continually linked in my study of human movement. We are animals, aren't we? I mean, we're just part of animal life. I would like my paintings to have the same immediate effect as a photograph of a wild animal after the kill. We've evolved over millions of years into the state of unnaturalness that we are in now. Humans are totally unnatural, and they vary from race to race in their degrees of unnaturalness. I'm not here to preach or anything. I work as near to my instinct as I possibly can, and that's all I can do. Somebody gave me the head of Blake, which you can see there, and I did 3 different versions from it. But that wasn't a homage to the work of Blake, because his work doesn't mean anything to me at all. Rather, it was the image itself which inspired these paintings. I do find that images, more than words, give me an idea or release my creative block. I tried to do these paintings of the Pope after Velasquez, but they never came off. I never got the colour, and I never got the screen vibrant enough. I think you have to break technique, break tradition to do something really new. You always go back into tradition, but you have to break it and reinvent it first. In the popes, it doesn't come from anything to do with religion. It comes from an obsession with a photograph that I know of Velasquez's Pope Innocent X. I think it is, to me, one of the greatest portraits that have ever been made, and I became obsessed by it. It's a picture that I've always been haunted by. I buy book after book with this illustration of Velasquez's Pope, and it opens up all sorts of feelings and areas of... well, I was going to say imagination, even, in me. I disliked my father, but I was sexually attracted to him when I was young. When I first sensed it, I hardly knew it was sexual. It was only later, through the grooms and the people at the stables I had affairs with, that I realized that it was a sexual thing towards my father. You could say that a scream is a horrific image. In fact, I wanted to paint the scream more than the horror. I think that if I had really thought about what causes somebody to scream, it would have made the scream that I tried to paint more successful. In fact, they were too abstract. I've always been very moved by the movements of the mouth and the shape of the mouth and the teeth. People say that these have all sorts of sexual implications. I like, you may say, the glitter and colour that comes from the mouth, and I've always hoped, in a sense, to be able to paint the mouth, like Monet painted a sunset. I love the mouth, because it's rather like a Turner. It's got all these beautiful colours about it. It's got these lovely vibrations of colour. always seem to think that in my paintings I'm trying to put across a feeling of suffering and the ferocity of life. But I don't think of it at all in that way myself. You see, the very fact of being born is a very ferocious thing. Just existence itself as one goes between birth and death. It's not that I want to emphasize that side of things, but I suppose if you're trying to work as near to your nervous system as you can, that's what automatically comes out. Life is just filled, really, with suffering and despair. Battleship Potemkin was a film I saw almost before I started to paint, and it deeply impressed me. I mean, the whole film, as well as the Odessa step sequence and this shot. I did hope one day to make the best painting of the human cry. I wasn't able to do it, and it's much better in the Eisenstein, and there it is. No work that anybody can ever do has got the violence that life itself has got. Real imagination is technical imagination. It is in the ways you think up to bring an event to life again. It is in the search for the technique to trap the object at a given moment. Then the technique and the object become inseparable. The object is the technique, and the technique is the object. Art lies to come near to the sensory side of objects. Real painters do not paint things as they are. After a dry and learned analysis, no, they paint them as they themselves feel them to be. When I started out, Cézanne was the god, but for me the very greatest artist of that period has always been Van Gogh. I'd always loved that picture, the one that burnt in Germany during the war, and as nothing else had gone right, I thought I'd try to do something with it. Actually, I've always liked early Van Gogh best, but that haunted figure on the road seemed just right at the time. Like a phantom of the road, you could say. Van Gogh got very near to the violence of life itself. It's true to say that when he painted a field, he was able to give you the violence of grass. Think of the violence of the grass he painted. It's one of the most violent and abominable things, if you really want to think about life. You know, in my case, all painting, and the older I get, the more it becomes so, is accident. So I foresee in my mind, I foresee it, and yet I hardly ever carry it out as I foresee it. It transforms itself by the actual paint. I use very large brushes, and in the way I work I don't in fact know very often what the paint will do, and it does many things which are very much better than I could make it do. Is that an accident? Perhaps one could say it's not an accident, because it becomes a selective process which part of this accident one chooses to preserve. One is attempting, of course, to keep the vitality of the accident and yet preserve a continuity. There is a possibility that you get through this accidental thing something much more profound than what you really wanted. As the way I work is totally now accidental, and becomes more and more accidental, and doesn't seem to behave, as it were, unless it is accidental, how can I recreate an accident? It's almost an impossible thing to do. This is the thing that can probably happen only in oil paint, because it is so subtle, that one tone, one piece of paint that moves one thing into another completely changes the implications of the image. I'm greedy for life, and I'm greedy as an artist. I'm greedy for what I hope chance can give me, far beyond anything that I can calculate logically. Landscapes interest me less. I think art is an obsession with life, and after all, as we are human beings, our greatest obsession is with ourselves, then possibly with animals, and then with landscapes. I like the country, but I can't live in it. I just have to come back to town to work. I hate to hear those things singing out there in the morning. Photography has altered completely this whole thing of figurative painting, and totally altered it, I think in a very positive way. I think that Velázquez believed that he was recording the court at that time, but a really good artist today would be forced to make a game of the same situation. He knows that the recording can be done by film, so that side of his activity has been taken over by something else. And all that he is involved in is making the sensibility open up through the image. You can't any longer make illustration because it's done so much better by the camera and by the cinema. So you have to really concentrate on making images that are a concentration of reality and a shorthand of sensation. I think one's sense of appearance is assaulted all the time by photography and by the film, so that when one looks at something, one's not only looking at it directly, but one's also looking at it through the assault that has already been made on one by photography and film. And 99% of the time I find that photographs are very much more interesting than either abstract or figurative painting. I've always been haunted by them. The interest in Muybridge was the movement, but he also did people who were deformed, with all forms of deformity, which were interesting in themselves. I very often think of people's bodies that I've known. I think of the contours of these bodies that have particularly affected me. But then they're grafted onto Muybridge's bodies. I manipulate the Muybridge bodies into the form of the bodies I have known. But of course, in my case, with this disruption all the time of the images, or distortion, or whatever you like to call it, it's an elliptical way of coming to the appearance of that particular body. Michelangelo and Muybridge are mixed up in my mind together. And so I could perhaps learn about positions from Muybridge and learn about the ampleness, the grandeur of form from Michelangelo. And it would be very difficult for me to disentangle the influence of Muybridge and the influence of Michelangelo. I don't only look at Muybridge photographs of the figure, I look all the time at photographs in magazines of footballers and boxers and all that kind of thing. Especially boxers. I had a book on positioning in radiography, and there were very interesting things in that. But for me, these things are just like what more conventional artists call having a model, or subject matter. These are my models and my subject matter. Although I've always looked at photographs, I've also always thought of the human body outside the photographs. And I think there could be an overemphasis on the photograph in my work, because the last thing I wanted to be is photographic in any way. I only use photographs as I would use a dictionary in a foreign language. Art is almost like a long affair with images, objects, sensations, and what you might call the passions. But everything escapes you. Now I feel that I want to do very, very specific objects, though made out of something which is completely irrational from the point of view of being an illustration. I want to do very specific things like portraits, and they will be portraits of the people I know, but when you come to analyze them, you just won't know, or it will be very hard to see, how the image is made up at all. And this is why, in a way, it is very wearing, because it is really a complete accident. When I look at you across the table, I don't only see you, but I see a whole emanation which has to do with personality and everything else. And to put that over in a painting, as I would like to be able in a portrait, means that it would appear violent in paint. We nearly always live through screens, a screened existence, and I sometimes think that perhaps I have, from time to time, been able to clear away one or two of the veils, or screens. Well, there's no point in doing a portrait of somebody if you're not going to make it look like him. I couldn't do people I didn't know very well. I wouldn't want to. Even in the case of friends who will come and pose. I've had photographs taken for portraits because I very much prefer working from photographs than from them. This may be just my own neurotic sense, but I find it less inhibiting to work from them through memory and their photographs than actually having them seated there before me. Now, very often a person's appearance belies their qualities. But generally speaking, I think that you can, to a great extent, analyze their character from their appearance. And so I'm certainly not trying to make a portrait of somebody's soul or psyche or whatever you like to call it. You can only make a portrait of their appearance, but I think that their appearance is deeply linked with their behavior. You must distort to transform what is called appearance into image. The more artificial you can make it, the greater chance you've got of making it look real. Whether the distortions which I think sometimes bring the image over more violently are damage is a very questionable idea. I don't think it is damage. You may say it's damaging if you take it on the level of illustration, but not if you take it on the level of what I think of as art. One brings the sensation and the feeling of life over the only way one can. I don't say it's a good way, but one brings it over at the most acute point one can. In the triptychs, I get them rather like police records, looking side face, front face, and then side face from the other side. In trying to do a portrait, my ideal would really be just to pick up a handful of paint and throw it at the canvas, and hope that the portrait was there. I don't really like doing portraits. A lot of people I've known very well have died. It's just a process of growing old. Life becomes more a desert around you. You're always aware of death. It's just around the corner for you. If you have a very, very strong feeling for life, its shadow, death, is always near you. It's always more difficult, or seems more difficult to me, to do heads of people who are dead. I like painting good-looking people, because I like good bone structure. I loathe my own face. But I go on painting it only because I haven't got any other people to do. One of the nicest things that Cocteau said was, "Each day, in the mirror, I watch death at work." This is what one does oneself. The important thing is always to succeed in grasping something which is constantly changing. And the problem is the same, whether it's a self-portrait or a portrait of someone else. I do absolutely understand what Giacometti meant when he said to me, "Why ever change the subject?" Because you could go on for the whole of your life painting the same subject. It's very interesting to me, for instance, that the great Rembrandts are his self-portraits. And he started them when he was very young and went on painting them until he was a very old man. One always has a greater involvement with oneself than with anybody else. No matter how much you may believe you're in love with somebody else, your love of somebody else is your love of yourself. I may very often be discontented and loathe myself, but I'm not trying to bring that out in any way whatsoever. Nor have I a disgust with life. Life is all we have. I mean, here we are here, for a moment. I know that things I really like doing are the triptychs. They are the things, and I think that this may be related to the thought I've sometimes had of making a film. I like the juxtaposition of the images, separated on 3 different canvases. With the painting that I did, which the Marlborough Gallery called Triptych, inspired by T.S. Eliot's poem Sweeney Agonistes, they had asked me how these images came about, and I said that I'd just been reading Sweeney Agonistes, and they titled it in the way that they did. And that is how those titles very often come about. But I really want to keep them as anonymous as possible, because I think that the titles lie within the images, and people can read what they like into them. I don't want to tell a story. I've no story to tell. I want the starkness of the image. I want it to give me a shock. Now, you could say shock is a form of expression, but what expression it is, I don't know. It's a visual shock. It's not a shock it's not a shock that you can get from a story. It's just a visual shock. I suppose what you do is coloured by the psychological state that you're in at certain times. But it would be an unconscious thing, not a conscious thing, because after all, I'm not an expressionist painter. I'm not trying to express anything. I wasn't trying to express the sorrow of somebody committing suicide or something like that. But perhaps it comes through without knowing it. It is the nearest thing I've ever done to a story. I read Aeschylus because the whole thing, the violence of Aeschylus, brings up images. If you remember that wonderful translation of one of his lines, "The reek of human blood smiles out at me," well, what could be more amazing than that? That immediately brings up the most astonishing images. I could not paint Agamemnon, Clytemnestra, or Cassandra, as that would have been merely another kind of historical painting. Therefore, I tried to create an image of the effect it produced inside me. What horror could I make that could compete with what goes on every single day? If you read the newspapers, if you look at television, if you know what goes on in the world, what could I do to compete with the horrors going on? Except that I have tried to make images of it. I have tried to recreate it and make, not the horror, I've tried to make images of realism. Things are not shocking if they haven't been put into a memorable form. Otherwise it's just blood spattered against a wall. In the end, if you see that 2 or 3 times, it's no longer shocking. It must be a form that has more than the implication of blood splashed against a wall. It's when it has much wider implications. It's something which reverberates within your psyche. It disturbs the whole life cycle within a person. It affects the atmosphere in which you live. Most of what is called art, your eye just flows over. It may be charming or nice, but it doesn't change you. I think that man now realizes that he is an accident, that he is a completely futile being, that he has to play out the game without reason. I think that even when Velasquez was painting, even when Rembrandt was painting, in a peculiar way they were still, whatever their attitude to life, slightly conditioned by certain types of religious possibilities. All art has now become completely a game by which man distracts himself. And you may say it has always been like that, but now it's entirely a game. I knew as soon as I walked in here that it was a place where I could really work. I work much better in chaos. I couldn't work in an absolutely tidy studio. That would be absolutely impossible for me. Chaos, for me, breeds images. I generally try and work regularly. I think what is called inspiration only comes, really, from regular work. One thing that nobody can explain is why the way one person puts the paint on has got 50 times more sensitivity than another person's application of paint. Why some people's paint seems to have all sorts of implications in it, and others doesn't. Can you analyse the difference, in fact, between paint, which conveys directly, and paint, which conveys through illustration? This is a very, very difficult problem to put into words. It is something to do with instinct. It's a very, very close and difficult thing to know why some paint comes across directly onto the nervous system and other paint tells you the story in a long diatribe through the brain. There is an area certainly of intention in an artist's work, but it's an intention related to his own instinctive life, and he doesn't actually know how that instinct is formed. The instinct comes, presumably, from the very moment of his conception, and is gradually worked on by all the things that he sees in life as it passes. In working, you are really following this kind of cloud of sensation in yourself, and you don't know what it is, really, and it's called instinct. But what instinct is, one doesn't know. There's this deep sea, which we call the unconscious, which we know nothing about. I always hope the most wonderful images will emerge from it. I believe in a deeply ordered chaos in my work. The images I try to make, at the same time, I want them to look very ordered. When they first come up, you're not in control of them. But when the image seems to emerge, then, to make it, you have to control it. But this is where it's so difficult with painting with oils. You make an image, but it's changing all the time, and then it's to do with your own instinct and sensibility which turns it one way or another. That doesn't mean I haven't got an overall idea of the type of thing I want to make, but I don't know how to make it. I've made images the intellect would never make. Nine-tenths of the nation, 90% of the people, 95% of the people are absolute fools. And they're bigger fools about painting than anything else, because it's a terribly rare thing for people to feel anything about painting. They can feel, oddly enough, about music. They can feel even about the theatre, but hardly anyone really feels about painting. They read things into it, even the most intelligent people. They think they understand it, but very, very few people are aesthetically touched by painting. I like men. Of course, male flesh attracts me. I just like men. I like the quality of their flesh. In the more recent pictures, it's pure sex. You know, I don't really like the billing and cooing of sex. I just like the sex itself. Do you think that's a homosexual thing? I suppose most couplings are violent, more or less. I hope they look like a reflection of reality, or a recreation of reality. But you could say that nearly all reality is pain. I mean, if one wants to read it that way. When I say all reality is pain, what I do feel is that if you're going to catch anything that is really real, I think if anything is strong, people think it's painful. Well, of course, we are meat. We are potential carcasses. If I go into a butcher's shop, I always think it's surprising that I wasn't there instead of the animal. I've always been very moved by pictures about slaughterhouses and meat, and to me they belong very much to the whole thing of the crucifixion. I know for religious people, for Christians, the crucifixion has a totally different significance. But for a non-believer, it was just an act of man's behaviour, a way of behaviour to another. Crucifixion images are a magnificent armature on which you can work about your own feelings and sensations. You are working on all sorts of very private feelings about behaviour and about the way life is. I was born in Ireland, and I was brought up as a Protestant, and I was brought up a rabid Protestant. No beliefs, of course. I think that most people who have religious beliefs are much more interesting than people who just lead a drifting life. On the other hand, I always feel that living by a total falseness, as I think they are living with their religious views, I can't help admiring them, but despairing for them. Of course one knows how very potent some of the images of Christianity have been, and how they have played very deeply on one's sensibility. And, after all, one believes in the ethics of Christianity, or a great number of them, without actually believing in the practice of the Church. I think that so far a better code of ethics for the Western world hasn't yet been found, though, of course, the religious side of it is something I can't accept. I think you can accept the ethics without believing that the good you do will be rewarded, or the evil you do will be punished. I think the only thing that really keeps me going on is that I want to work. But work, I may say, for no reason. I just work. It still excites me to work. You see, unless you have religious feelings or something of that kind, how can you not think that life is totally futile, and becomes more so with age, because it hasn't got the pleasures of youth? Probably the only thing, although I know it has no meaning, is that I like working. I like the possibilities of invention and the possibilities of something happening. Not because I think they've got any value, but because they excite me. I think some of the images I have made have for me got a kind of potency about them, and so, you may say, I care that those ones should remain. But if I think logically, it's stupid to think even that way, because I simply won't know anything about it. Time is the only great critic. To be an artist at all is a form of vanity. And that vanity may be washed over by this rationally futile idea of immortality. It would also be a vanity to suggest that what one does oneself may help to thicken life. But of course, we do know that our lives have been thickened by great art. One of the very few ways in which life has been really thickened is by the great things that a few people have left. Well, art is, of course, a profoundly vain occupation, really. Between birth and death, it's always been the same thing, the violence of life. I always think they are images of sensation. After all, what is life but sensation? What we feel, what happens at the moment. We are born and we die, and that's it. There's nothing else. We are born and we die, but in between we give this purposeless existence a meaning by our drives.